You call your annoying boss medieval. You call a bad hospital medieval. You call anything backward, filthy, or cruel medieval, and you never think twice about it. The word has become an insult. But the real Middle Ages would surprise you. Some of it is stranger than anything you'd invent, and some of what you assume is exaggeration turns out to be completely, provably true. Start with the courtroom. Picture a real trial with a real judge, real lawyers, and a real defendant standing in the dock. Now picture that defendant is a pig. In 1386, a court in Falaise, France did exactly this. A sow was formally charged with the death of a child, assigned a defense attorney, tried under the same procedures used for a human, and ultimately executed in public, dressed in a jacket and breeches to mark the occasion. This wasn't a one-time joke. The historian E.P. Evans catalogued hundreds of these cases across Europe involving pigs, rats, weevils, even entire colonies of insects summoned to appear in court. Why put an animal on trial? Because medieval law didn't separate the natural world from the moral one. If something caused harm, it bore responsibility. Justice applied to every creature under God, hooves and all. That same logic shaped how humans were judged too. If you were accused of a crime and evidence was thin, a medieval court might not ask you to prove your innocence with witnesses. It might ask you to plunge your arm into boiling water or grip a red-hot iron bar and walk 3 paces. If the wound healed clean within days, you were innocent. God, the thinking went, would not let an innocent person suffer. This was called trial by ordeal, and it was not some fringe superstition. It was formal legal procedure, recognized by kings and clergy alike, until the church backed away from it in 1215. The historian Robert Bartlett has shown how deeply rational this system felt to the people living inside it. It wasn't chaos. It was a functioning legal order, just one built on assumptions you no longer share. Does that make it primitive? Or does it just make it a different kind of faith in the system? Here's one that sounds like a modern invention. Quarantine, the actual word. In the 1300s, as the Black Death tore through Europe, the maritime city of Ragusa, now Dubrovnik, ordered incoming ships to sit anchored offshore for 30 days before anyone could disembark. Venice extended that isolation period to 40 days soon after, and the Italian word for 40, quaranta, gave the practice its name. Nobody understood germs yet. Nobody had ever seen a virus, but officials had noticed a pattern, and they built a system around it centuries before science could explain why it worked. The next time a health authority tells you to isolate after exposure to illness, you're following a rule invented by frightened port officials, watching ships bob in the harbor, waiting to see who got sick. Now the filth. You've probably absorbed the idea that medieval people never bathed, reeked constantly, and considered water dangerous. Some of that holds up. Much of it doesn't. Wealthy households built private bathing rooms. Towns operated public bath houses, called stews, where you could pay to soak in heated water. Monasteries had strict hygiene schedules built into their daily rule. The historian Virginia Smith, who traced the entire history of personal cleanliness, found that bathing habits actually declined later during the Renaissance, when doctors began warning that hot water opened the pores to plague. Medieval people weren't the dirty ones. Later generations were, and they blamed the wrong century for it. Think about knights next, and the armor you picture. Heavy, clanking, barely able to lift an arm, let alone climb onto a horse without a crane. Modern experimental archaeology has tested this directly. Researchers at institutions, including the Royal Armouries in Leeds, have had trained volunteers wear accurate reproduction plate armor and run, climb, even do cartwheels. A full suit, distributed properly across the body, weighed roughly the same as a modern soldier's combat gear. Knights could vault into the saddle unaided. They could fight for extended periods without collapsing from exhaustion. The armor wasn't a prison. It was engineering, refined over centuries to protect a moving human body without stopping it from moving. So why does the myth of the immobilized knight persist? Maybe because helplessness makes a better punchline than expertise. Time itself worked differently, and this is the fact that quietly explains half your daily habits. Before the mechanical clock spread through European towns in the 1300s, hours weren't fixed. They stretched and shrank with the seasons, tied to sunrise, prayer, and daylight. Monasteries kept the earliest reliable timekeeping, ringing bells to mark canonical hours through the day and night. The historian David Landis, who studied the spread of mechanical clocks across Europe, described how this single technology reorganized human life around a fixed, external schedule instead of the sun. Once towns installed public clocks in their squares, work stopped following the light and started following the face of the tower. That shift is the direct ancestor of your alarm, your meetings, your entire structured day. You didn't invent the tyranny of the schedule. A medieval monastery did. Charity had structure too, more than you'd expect. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris, a hospital run by the church, was caring for the sick as early as the 7th century, and by the height of the Middle Ages, hospitals like it existed across nearly every major European city. They weren't just holding pens for the dying. Some kept separate wards, offered basic surgical care, and operated on the belief that caring for strangers was a religious obligation, not an optional kindness. Compare that to how differently charity gets framed today, as a personal choice rather than a civic structure. Which model actually built more of the safety net you rely on now? Vision itself got an upgrade in this period that people rarely credit. Eyeglasses were invented in Italy around 1286, likely near Pisa, by craftsmen grinding glass lenses to correct farsightedness. Within decades, images of monks and scholars wearing spectacles start appearing in religious paintings across Europe. Before this, growing older meant your ability to read simply ended. Suddenly, it didn't have to. An entire class of aging scholars, monks, and merchants could keep working, keep copying texts, keep running businesses well past the point their eyes would have failed them a generation earlier. That's not a footnote. That's one of the more significant productivity inventions in human history, and it happened in a century you probably picture as candlelit and backward. Universities produced their own kind of chaos, and it involved actual bloodshed. Medieval students at places like Paris and Bologna were classified as clergy, which meant they fell under church law rather than civil law, even when they committed violent crimes. Brawls between students and townspeople sometimes escalated into riots with real casualties, and the students involved frequently escaped serious punishment because secular courts had no authority over them. In 1355, a dispute over the price of wine in Oxford exploded into 2 days of rioting between students and locals, leaving dozens dead. The university survived. The legal loophole survived longer. Doesn't that sound a little too familiar? An institution's members operating by a different set of rules than everyone around them? And then there's the famine most people have never heard of, despite it reshaping an entire generation. Between 1315 and 1317, relentless rain destroyed harvests across northern Europe for consecutive years. The historian William Chester Jordan documented how the Great Famine that followed killed an estimated 10 to 15% of the population in affected regions, driven by crop failure so severe that chroniclers recorded instances of families abandoning children they could no longer feed. This happened a full generation before the Black Death arrived, meaning the population that met the plague in 1347 had already been weakened by decades of instability. The Middle Ages didn't get one catastrophe. It absorbed several, back to back, and kept functioning anyway. Look at the average life expectancy figures thrown around for the Middle Ages, usually somewhere in the low 30s, and it sounds like a death sentence waiting to happen. That number is real, but it gets badly misread. It's dragged down almost entirely by catastrophic infant and child mortality, not by adults dropping dead in their prime. Manor and parish records show that a person who survived to their 20th birthday had a real chance of reaching their 60s, sometimes their 70s. Old age wasn't rare. It was ordinary enough that church and civil records both kept established categories for elderly dependents, widows, and pensioned retainers. Somewhere between the raw statistic and the story built on top of it, an entire population of grandparents got erased. Doesn't that change the picture, imagining castles and villages full of the old as well as the young? Court fools deserve more credit too, and not just for the juggling. A skilled jester held something close to a working exemption to mock the king directly to his face, saying things that would get a nobleman executed for treason. Chroniclers describe court fools needling rulers about failed wars, bad marriages, and unpopular taxes, protected by an unwritten understanding that the role demanded brutal honesty dressed up as comedy. Kings kept them close for exactly that reason. A ruler surrounded by flattery loses touch with reality fast, and a fool with bells on his cap was sometimes the only person in the room willing to say so. It's the closest thing the medieval world had to a free press, operating out of a jester's motley instead of a printing house. Put all of it together, and a different picture forms. Courts that extended justice to animals, because they believed responsibility applied to every living thing. Quarantine procedures built from observation alone, centuries before anyone understood disease. Clocks that rewired the human relationship with time itself. Eyeglasses that extended a person's working life. None of this fits the word medieval as you've been using it. The insult was never accurate. It was just convenient, a way of flattening centuries of trial, error, and genuine innovation into a single joke about mud and ignorance. So the next time you hear someone dismiss an idea as medieval, ask them which version they mean. The one that quarantined ships to stop a plague it couldn't even see. The one that engineered armor light enough to cartwheel in. The one that built hospitals on the belief that strangers deserved care. Because that version isn't an insult, it's a mirror. And it's been standing behind you the whole time, closer than you think. You just needed a reason to finally turn around and look.